Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Lorgar's discovery, Lorgar's Betrayal in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Index Asteroots, Ultramarines. Origins. When Robert Guilliman, the Primarch of the 13 Legion, landed on Macrage, it was a prosperous world. Its people had adapted to the inhospitable mountainous landscape, setting up a stable post-feudal system of world government based on the leadership of 2 consuls, and its future seemed assured. The greatest problem was the nobility. Across Macrage, petty lords continued squabbling for land and privilege, oppressing those not born into their aristocracy and stifling progress. The consul Konr found the infant Robert near the sacred 2-kilometer Azure waterfall, and soon thereafter adopted the child. Galen, the other consul, was suspicious of the child, and when the Primarch learned and grew unnaturally quickly, Galen grew to believe the child was an inhuman monster. Perhaps Guilliman's emotionless demeanor and arrogance contributed to this impression. Konr, however, harbored no doubts about his son. The issue of Robert soon grew into a general feud between the 2 consuls. In the power struggle, Galen gained the support of most nobles, but not all. The middle classes, meanwhile, tended to favor Konr. For some time there was a risk civil war would erupt. In part to defuse the tension, Guilliman was sent away to conquer the barbarians of the Illyrium Mountains. Robert had always excelled in theoretical military strategy, and proved even more magnificent in real war, smashing apart the barbarians' bands and, moreover, turning many of them to the consulate's cause. He was preparing to return when the Eldar came. It was a maelstrom of destruction that swept Macrage. It was not exterminatus, not quite, but the major cities were left in ruins. When Robert, having waited out the apocalypse in a cave, returned to the capital at top speed, he did not find even that. A crater 10 kilometers across took its place. No bodies were ever found. Later, Guilliman would find out the Eldar had unleashed this nightmare in order to prevent a possible future they foresaw, but he has never decided to hate them in any special way for this reason. The episode, he says, is too tragic for anything but grief and regret. There are some records showing he did harbor some special resentment against the species during the Great Crusade, but the stream of that hate was swept away by the flood that came during the betrayal. The overwhelming feeling that took over the Primarch's heart when Macrage saw Armageddon was guilt. He had failed, for all of his amazing abilities, to protect virtually everybody he loved from fiery obliteration. He had conquered Illyrium, but hadn't saved the empire he had conquered it for. As Macrage collapsed into chaos, Robert Guilliman collapsed into despair. Still, he did not indulge himself too much. As he saw the destruction that anarchy wrought, even in areas not directly hit by the Eldar attack, he swore to build up an empire again, a stronger, better defended one. He wandered the planet, uniting small bands, founding cities, never staying in one place too long but making sure to leave an order that could protect itself in his wake. Progress was slow, but with time, about a third of the planet had fallen under Guilliman's control. It was an array of towns and estates, though the lords lost almost all power under Guilliman. Instead, the Primarch set up a system of meritocracy. Stability seemed in sight once more, with Guilliman accelerating technological progress to the point of crude Earth-space missiles to protect against a Xeno return. And then the sky did light on fire again, but not as a threat. The Emperor of Mankind had arrived. The Great Crusade. Guilliman was uplifted by his father's coming and eagerly pledged Macrage to the Imperium. As it turned out, Macrage was in a distant quarter of the galaxy, and the Emperor's fleet had largely come to the region by accident. In the following years, as Guilliman got to know his brothers and discover other worlds, his bleak past was almost forgotten. More than any of his other brothers, Guilliman befriended Fulgrim of Chemos. The 2 Primarches had been found by the Emperor almost simultaneously, and Fulgrim's life story was a light mirror of Guilliman's own, where the latter had been born in a prosperous world and had seen its apocalypse. Fulgrim's home planet had been dying before the Primarch's arrival, and only his efforts had reinvigorated it. The 2 Primarch's friendship was exemplified by how each of them forged the other's signature weapon, Guilliman forging Fulgrim's longsword Unending, and Fulgrim Guilliman's hammer Forge Breaker. Inspired by Fulgrim, Guilliman quickly restored Macrage to a functional world of the Imperium of Man, fully centralized and led by an elected council. At the same time, Gilliman made sure to keep a loose hand capable of tightening around his home world, and 2 titanic polar fortresses were built as bases for the Legion. Macridge shall know war no more. It will be a world of prosperity, a world of joy. The Legion will remain, and at times recruit, but my home world has seen enough destruction for an eternity. But to achieve peace, there is no doubt Macridge must be ready for war, as must the rest of the Imperium. Robert Gilliman. Fulgrim was not the only one of his brothers Gilliman built a rapport with. The Lion's technical acumen and promises of truly infinite energy and progress excited Gilliman greatly, as they were precisely the ideals of the Great Crusade. Corix, by contrast, did not seem truly interested in what these ideals even were, except insofar as they restricted his own actions. The Lord of the Raven Guard had been trained as an assassin, and though the Regent of Ultramar, Gilliman's official title, knew him as deserving of fear, there was little in the way of respect. It was even worse with the bloody Perturabo, though at least the Lord of Iron admitted his flaws. As for Rogel Dorn, Gilliman had been his good friend in the early days of his participation in the crusade. With time, however, Dorn's increasingly nihilistic nature grew tiresome, and the Regent of Ultramar came to focus on other things. One of them was building an empire. Besides campaigning with his legion, Gilliman also looked inward, seeking to prevent the disaster that had befallen Macridge from impacting other worlds. With his father's permission, he organized the region around Macridge into a realm of Ultramar. It quickly blossomed under Gilliman's general direction and the closer watch of the 4 tetrarchs chosen to oversee specific portions of the Dominion. By the time of the Great Betrayal, Ultramar covered 813 worlds, each one a jewel shining in its own tint. Macridge was the most brilliant among them, a patchwork of mountains and cities that produced, per citizen, more food than the average agri-world, more industrial goods than the average forge world, and more money than any other planet in the vast imperium of man. This success came with a price, of course. The duties of the Regent of Ultramar called often. The 100,000-strong legion, Gilliman would never disobey his father's verdict, crusade slower than some others. In truth, their speed was gradual, less due to distraction and more because of their conquest's nature. Every world that the Ultramarines conquered, Gilliman decreed, had to be left in the best possible condition for the long term. That meant few mining worlds, for resources would run out without the use of the Lion's warp technology. That meant a long process of rebuilding on each and every conquered planet. The Ultramarines learned to fight in small groups, for sometimes as few as 10 squads were sent to conquer a resisting empire. The Legion performed well despite this stress, and Gilliman's tactical abilities, undulled by time, ensured that fitting commanders were sent to every corner of the Ultramarines' front. The 13th Legion's conquests were not impressive by sheer number of worlds, but among all the legions, the Ultramarines brought the highest population into the Imperium over the course of the Crusade, because they selected only major targets and attempted to achieve less destructive conquests. Casualty rates were high, but this was offset by the Legion's recruiting, not only from Macridge, but also from the other planets in Ultramar. Moreover, a focus on intensive training prevented the Ultramarines from relying too much on new recruits, though the long training programs lessened the Legion's effective strength further. Used to fighting on the edge, the Ultramarines nevertheless gained fame for the wonders they left behind. Thorough investigations were carried out on each taken planet, and the effort put into them was repaid. During the Great Betrayal, not a single world taken by the Ultramarines rebelled, making the 13th the lone legion with that distinction. Among those planets that stayed loyal, for instance, was Geniet, once a planet of 3 warring brutal dictatorships, which had to be illuminated by force. Its population had been caged by semi-religious ignorance, and was far too high to be supported by the planet's resources, yet the Imperium's technology and Gilliman's bureaucratic skill allowed it to become not just a quietly loyal world, but one that in later generations would birth iconoclasts and visionaries, firmly defying its prior culture. Among those planets, too, was Anrasa. Its tribal humans had been hunted by flying Xenos, for Anrasa was the capital of those Xenos' empire. The Anrasite fleet had been drawn far away from the world by Gilliman already, but Anrasa was well defended. The Ultramarines landed a few squads that inspired a revolt by the humans, synchronized with aerial insertions into the Xenos' Ares. The Anrasite army was tricked into a chase across the planet, one that ultimately ended in a suicidal charge into a city that had once been theirs, and that was now taken over by the once enslaved humans. In the Olaner campaign, Guilliman and Fulgrim, who had been campaigning together for some time, fought alongside the Emperor himself. Their tactical acumen, combined with exemplary success earlier in the crusade, led him to declare the two brothers war masters as he departed back to Terra. There, too, he informed them of the dangers of chaos and how to combat them, though neither brother imagined the demonic affecting the Imperium as it disastrously did. Both Fulgrim and Guilliman were shocked at this honor, and in the years following their ascension they ensured the Great Crusade advanced faster and more successfully than ever. That was not always easy. Jagatai Khan, once a lightning-quick and highly successful warrior, had become little more than a barbarian raider. Instructing Korix or Horus on what to do was always difficult. Ferrus Manus and Alpharius seemed to make worlds and systems more loyal to themselves than to the Emperor. The Blood Angels didn't particularly seem to desire war at all. Yet together, by hints and movements, Guilliman and Fulgrim seemed to steer the uncommandable. Together, it seemed they could do anything. It appeared that the wonders of the Great Crusade would continue to reveal themselves, that Ultramar's glory would stand inviolate, that this paradise would last forever. And only after it ended did Guilliman realize how fragile the dream of those last few years had really been. Robert Guilliman stared at the map once more, 100 years later. For a century he had not dared enter this room, this strategic chamber where he had plotted the Great Crusade with Fulgrim. An eternity had passed, for all intents and purposes, yet less than an instant in astronomical time. The stars were still in the same places, as were the planets, those not destroyed intentionally during the betrayal. How irresponsible were men, to interfere in the dance of the heavens. How they destroyed without creating, devoured without forging. The worlds they had been planning to conquer were distant now, lost, perhaps forever. Planets they had thought secure were the hearts of petty empires. But the Imperium was expanding once more in area. If all went well, in another few centuries a map of the Imperium would look not unlike one from the time of Olaner. Only it would be an illusion. The spirit of those times was gone, the idealism, the genuine belief that they could win against the forces of entropy that had followed mankind since the first human had understood them. Gone, the War Master suspected, even from his own mind, and from those of his brothers who still stood. They fought because of fear now rather than because of hope, and they could not triumph because of fear, only survive. If Fulgrim had been there, Guilliman knew, they could have changed this course. If Fulgrim had been there, they would have been able to recreate the Great Crusade. And having failed him, Guilliman could only hope to hold the line. The Great Betrayal. Guilliman had been concerned about certain fleet movements in the months before the Great Betrayal, but discussion with Fulgrim allayed his fears. It would have been better if it hadn't. Honest Van, 8 legions proclaimed their rebellion against the Emperor and Imperium. Among them were the Imperial Fists, the White Scars, the Iron Warriors and, to Robert Guilliman's great shock and sadness, the Dark Angels. Recognizing the importance of humanity's homeworld, Guilliman had stationed his legion's 6th chapter on Terra at all times. Now, the entire crusading strength of the legion, led by Robert Guilliman, along with the Emperor's children under Fulgrim, attempted to join them. Approximately 40,000 Ultramarines and somewhat fewer Emperor's children reached Terra mere days before the first fleet of the traitors attacked, largely because, as War Masters, Guilliman and Fulgrim had had access to the Imperium's fastest ships. There, though, they found themselves forced to take effective command of the siege, for the Emperor had been severely wounded while working on his secret projects, and would only briefly fight in the palace's defense. Strategically, Lorgar's plots were not excellently thought out. Though an able tactician in principle, the Med Primarch's devotion guided him in place of any strategic plan. But as Chaos Drop Pods fell to Terra, Lorgar's most fundamental advantage remained. There was nothing that could prepare the Ultramarines, Emperor's children, and Raven Guard to fight their brothers. The defending legions hid their air and space assets within the Imperial Palace and, with heavy hearts, began the first defense of Terra. The Imperial Fists and Salamanders battered at the walls of the Imperial Palace, but their effectiveness was greatly decreased by Perturabo and Jagatai Khan's disobedience. Nevertheless, Perturabo's bloody attacks had their own effect. The Iron Warriors died in droves, but got closer to breaching the wall than Dorn ever did. Once, on the walls of the imperial palace, a full grand company of iron warriors, led by warsmith Crondel, actually reached the complex's interior. Guilliman himself had calculated the region in question as a weak point, though, and Crondel was met by the Ultramarines War Master, as well as 2 full Ultramarine companies. Crondel still had the advantage in numbers, but in a berserker rage he launched himself and his forces at Guilliman. The War Master was greatly wounded by the assault, but its ferocity enabled Erican Gaius and the 21st to surround and then eliminate the 4th Legion's force. Gaius personally strangled Crondel before getting his Primarch to safety. But though weakened, Guilliman was far from mortally wounded. He continued to command the Imperial forces during the recovery, though overall command was Fulgrim's and the Emperor's. He witnessed the arrival of the Death Guard and the destruction of the traitor's fleet, but his satisfaction was tempered by the knowledge that the Second Fleet was coming and the awareness that he was fighting his brothers. Cain Atreus, master of the 6th chapter, led the 63rd and 64th companies on a hunt for Rogaldorn. They found him holed up in a fortress of wreckage and recycled metal to the palace's west. This time, however, it was Dorn's defenses that stood inviolate. Atreus overconfidently attacked with only the 2 companies and was soundly repulsed, dying in the process. As Terra burned, Ultramarines stationed across the galaxy noted the emergence of odd cults. Devoted to the powers that would later be called the Chaos Gods, these organizations destabilized many worlds and summoned terrifyingly odd creatures. The Ultramarine forces in the wider galaxy battled those attacks wherever they were, saving many worlds from the embrace of chaos but losing many others. On Terra, meanwhile, the dreaded Second Fleet landed. The battered Imperial forces were forced to retreat into the palace. The Lion's forces attempted to break down the palace walls by force, whereas Ferrus Manus and Lorgar concentrated on the area of the Iron Warrior Breach. After finally making an opening for themselves, the traitor legions had a temporary advantage, but the Luna Wolves were fast approaching, and the Loyalists were still powerful. It was during this time that Captain Lysimachus Cestus and the 7th Company, the only company of the 1st chapter to have made it to Terra, held the abyssal depths of the Imperial Palace against constant Iron Hand emergenks. It was then that Erican Gaius directed the detonation of large chunks of the palace to endlessly block the Word-Bearer's advance while permitting Imperial forces mobility where it mattered. It was then that the Lion himself stormed the wing of the Imperial Palace containing Guilliman, and the 2 Primarches clashed in a duel of unsurpassed ferocity. Each succeeded in knocking the other unconscious and thereafter had to be rescued by loyal troops. The Ultramarine War Master entered a brief coma after the duel, but survived. Unfortunately, during Guilliman's coma, the greatest tragedy of the heresy took place. Unable to achieve a strategic advantage, Lorgar broke a path to the Imperial throne room. There, he sacrificed his life to kill the War Master Fulgrim and cripple the Emperor of Mankind. Guilliman's truest friend was gone, and his one father might as well have been. When he awoke, the 13th Primarch found his world once more destroyed, though this time in a less concrete sense. He had failed. This was Macrage, again, and Macrage was Fulgrim. Had Guilliman killed the Lion, then, he could have slowed the traitor's advance. Had Guilliman killed the Lion, he could have been there with, or instead of Fulgrim. But instead he had been weak, and everyone would pay the price. Meanwhile, in Ultramar, 1st chapter Master Marius Gage remained the temporary leader. Only one of the Dominion's planets faced a major revolt, the ocean world of Nakisar. There, Gage began an Azure Crusade to reclaim the Eastern Fringe and return it into the Imperium's hands. Many uprisings were defeated, and a sphere of relative stability with Ultramar at the center emerged. In the region known as the Unbroken Stars, Gage was killed while facing a behemoth space fish, a monstrosity that floated in the void between planets and sent down lesser creatures to devour those worlds. It has recently become clear that this was probably the first Tyranid Hive fleet to reach the Milky Way. Nevertheless, the Azure Crusade survived Gage's death. The place of Ultramar's leader was tentatively taken by 4th Captain Remus Ventanus, who unlike Gage stayed on Macrage and fortified the Legion's home world. The crusade was led by Tetrarch Nicodemus. But though Ventanus greatly expanded the polar fortresses of Macrage and crafted void defenses similar in power to those of Terra itself, most of the Legion's strength in the Ultramar region was nevertheless involved in the crusade, and thus the Word-Bearer's actions during the escape became possible. The escape. After the battle for Terra, the Ultramarines numbered approximately 45,000 across the galaxy, 15,000 on Terra, 10,000 in the Azure Crusade, and 20,000 scattered across the galaxy. Infuriated at his brother's death, Guilliman decreed that the Word-bearers would pay for their betrayal in blood. After the funeral, the Ultramarines of Guilliman made full speed for Colchis, aided by a large contingent of Luna Wolves under Tarek Torgadon. They arrived at the traitor homeworld only to find the remaining Word-bearers, under Corphaeron, being so arrogant as to be collecting recruits from the planet. The situation quickly deteriorated into a mess for the Word-bearers, and though they had a numerical advantage, they soon fell into a disorganized retreat. Nevertheless, they had picked up many new recruits from the cathedrals of Colchis. Angry at this, though mostly at other things, Rabut Guilliman ordered the world be wiped clean of life. After the destruction of Colchis, the Word-bearers did not head for the Eye of Terror like the other Chaos Legions. Instead, they flew. Their flight sped up far past what the Ultramarines could achieve by dark sorceries, for the heart of Ultramar. Once again, Guilliman's home died, first Calth and then Macrage. Hold them off. Evacuate the civilians. Macrage has been invaded from space before, and we all know how that ended. But that was then, this is now. We must ensure that there is something left for the War Master to rebuild from, as there is not on Kelth. In memoriam, brothers. We stand for Macrage. Remus Ventanus. The orbital defenses of Ventanus were nowhere near enough to save the Legion's home world. Even as Nicodemus joined Guilliman and fragments of both legions that had been lost during the maelstrom of the Great Betrayal rejoined their leaders, assembling a fleet that contained nearly 50,000 Asteroutes, the Word-bearers blazed across Macrage, seeking to corrupt it and dedicate it as a shrine to their med-gods. In that they largely failed, yet the world was cleared of civilization, though not life. Ventanus kept the northern polar fortress secure from a series of Word-bearer attacks, yet after weeks of heavy bombardment and endless assaults the southern fortress was breached by Captain Tzadkiel of the Word-bearers. It was only then that the skies above Macrage lit with the return of Rabut Guilliman. Corphaeron remained at Macrage just long enough to pick up most of his ground troops, and then fled, heading for the Eye of Terror. Though he still had comparable numbers to the Ultramarine Luna Wolf Alliance, 40,000, with almost as many more scattered across Ultramar, his fleet was vastly inferior. Nonetheless, the main tendril of this fleet successfully evaded Nicodemus's pursuit. Thus Guilliman was left alone in the ruins of Macrage, for the second time. There was mourning, and then there was rebuilding. Looking into the far future, Guilliman swore that Macrage would never be devastated like this again, not even in a million years. It was repopulated and cleansed from the ritual's taint using the methods taught to Guilliman by the Emperor. Meanwhile, the Legion itself began a process of rapid expansion, its numbers rising six-fold within a few centuries. Accepting Alpharius repealing the rule of 100,000, Guilliman set the nominal size of his legion at 300,000, including 29 chapters. Ultramarines were sent across the galaxy to garrison important worlds, to ensure as few planets as possible would fall to Xenos and heretics. Nevertheless, though the Imperium recovered, the effect the betrayal and fall of Macrage had on Guilliman cannot be overstated. It is because of those events that he now uses his War Master title exclusively in specialization on the defensive portions of war. The Legion shared his guilt and grief 300,000-fold. The Long War. When Malcador, at the end of his long life, decreed the Astarte legions should find callings other than war, the Ultramarines chose the study of history. Today Macrage boasts the Library of Ptolemy, the greatest archive in the Imperium, which contains among countless other details a record of the Legion's many victories. Throughout Imperial history, the Ultramarines have defended far more planets than any other Legion. They have become siege and void war experts, though they have by no means lost their skill in offensive warfare. Prominently, in the middle of M35, Rabut Guilliman himself led the massed assault on the Nova Terra Interregnum, a group that sought to end the rule of the Primarchs and managed to usurp the loyalty of large fractions of the Imperial army. At its height, the Interregnum controlled over 100,000 planets. This single greatest rebellion, besides the betrayal, in Imperial history was put down from within by the Alpha Legion and without from the Vengeant 13th. This pattern had recurred on a smaller scale many times in Imperial history, from Escrator to Carcharias, with an ultramarine garrison and Alpha Legion agents uniting to contain and annihilate an incipient rebellion. In other times, Great Xeno and Chaos invasions have been broken by ultramarine defenders. On Chundrabad, in 141.m36, a billion-strong Orc invasion broke on the defenses of Captain Agnathio, which held only 200 Space Marines. Agnathio won the battle, but the 200 were lost, every single one of them killed in the fierce fighting. Agnathio himself was broken but not quite dead when relieving forces found him, and was subsequently interred in a dreadnought. On Arios, in 220.m38, the Word-bearers ambushed a large force of Ultramarines under 8th Chapter Master Orlando Furioso. Furioso was quickly killed, but the assault was repulsed. This was followed within days by a number of other attacks on Ultramarine leadership, resulting in the deaths of 7 of 30 chapter masters and several captains. Those assassinations did not reach their desired effect of breaking the Legion, however, and not one planet was lost in the attacks. As the administrative division of Ultramar grew in size and decreased in centralization, it became increasingly unnecessary. Thus in 313.m38 Gilaman formally abolished the empire, 8 millennia after it had first been created. By then, however, this was a mere formality, as Ultramar had long been disunited. The 13th Legion does, however, intervene in the governance of, and often fully rule, its garrison worlds. In 745.m41 Macrage saw its greatest invasion since the Betrayal. A titanic force of Tyranids, Hive Fleet Behemoth, descended on the system. At this point Macrage's defenses were led by 1st Chapter Master Marnus Calgar, Gilaman being on Terra. It was known by this time that, if the Tyranids reached the planet's surface, Macrage would likely be lost, so Calgar waged a desperate war in space. The conflict claimed the lives of most of the 1st chapter, including 1st Captain Sol Invictus, and Calgar was left entirely limbless, his arms and legs later replaced by bionics, but Macrage was saved. Calgar remains the 1st chapter master today, and is revered by the Ultramarines for saving their home world, the second most respected in the Legion after their Primarch. In 992.m41, Macrage and the surrounding worlds were attacked for the most recent time, this time by a large force of Iron Warriors under Warsmith Hansu. Though they did not come close to reaching Macrage's surface, 4 of the planets closest to it were ravaged, among them the rebuilt Kelth. Hansu himself was briefly believed to have been killed by an enraged Gilaman, torn in two in the depths of Kalth's cavern systems, but is now known to have escaped. Yet Macrage still stands inviolate, and Rabut Gilaman's promise yet holds. Organization. Upon Gilaman's discovery, the Primarch reorganized his legion. Formerly, it was divided into 100 companies, each led by a captain, of 100 sergeant-led squads each, with each squad containing 10 marines. Gilaman added the rank of chapter master, with each chapter containing 10 companies. Moreover, Gilaman created the platoons of 10 squads each, led by lieutenants. Thus, for instance, Lieutenant Kato Sicarius commands the 2nd platoon of the Captain Orton Cassius 2nd Company, which is part of Marnus Calgar's 1st chapter. The 1st chapter is oversized and includes 20 companies instead of the usual 10. Currently, the Ultramarines include 29 chapters. The 1st platoon generally consists of a company's veterans and is often mostly clad in Terminator armor. The 2nd through 5th feature a mix of various marine specializations, the standard configuration being 3 heavy weapon Devastator squads, 2 jump pack equipped assault squads, a scout squad with sniper weaponry, and 4 tactical squads equipped with various weapon types. The 6th through 10th subcompanies are not meant to function by themselves, and consist of only 1 squad type each, with the exception of the 7th, which is half Devastators and half tactical squads. The 6th company includes only tactical squads, the 8th only assault squads, the 9th only Devastator squads, and the 10th only scout squads. New recruits typically serve in scout squads first. Afterward, they try various types of weaponry to find their most effective combinations and join a corresponding squad. The Ultramarines include librarians, tech marines, and apothecaries, with each of these typically numbering about 5,000 to 7,000 asteroutes, a lot, but affordable for a largely stationary legion. The tech marines are simply asteroutes of various rank that have taken a pilgrimage to Mars, but the librarium and apothecarium are entirely separate from the chapters, with each being divided into 13 divisions of Nominally, 500 asteroids each responsible for a region of the galaxy. These 13 dominions, 2 in each segmentum, except Ultima Segmentum, which holds 5, also provide a general organization for the Legion. The chapters are mobile, and garrisons of nearby worlds, but of different chapters, are often linked closer together than to members of the same chapter half a galaxy away. In fact, the command system of the Ultramarines is generally flexible, with captains and chapter masters having great leeway to customize their structures. Marnus Calgar, for instance, has devoted his chapter's 15th company entirely to the elimination of the Tyrannid species. These tyrannic veterans have been vital in the defense of several planets from the extragalactic onslaught, but are also well trained in void warfare and taking the fight to the enemy, concepts especially needed against this threat. Combat Doctrine. The Ultramarines' combat doctrine is flexible and highly adaptive to the current situation. However, to say there are no patterns would be a lie. The 13th Legion runs theoretical simulations on most every enemy they can possibly face in various settings. It is likely they have prepared for a given battle before they know of it. Their practical attacks are thus based around those theoreticals. They can, with some difficulty, be changed at a moment's notice. Some of the basic doctrines of the Ultramarine combat system were written down by Robert Guilliman in mid-M33, in what became known as the Codex Asteroutes. This has been greatly expanded over the years, both by Guilliman and by the Legion's chapter masters. The Codex text is, however, only ever revealed to members of the Legion, and certain chapters are hidden based on rank. Only Guilliman, the first chapter master, the chief librarian, currently Vero Tigurius, and first apothecary, currently Saenorus Chiron, are permitted to see the full text of the Codex Asteroutes, as it contains parts on such topics as killing Primarchs, fighting other Ultramarines, and invading Terra itself. The Codex is only a guide, Captain Ventress, for all its perfection. If you thought I was going to reprimand you for blatantly violating it, you need not worry. I would, however, remind you that the hive mind remembers what tricks have been used against it. Do not waste your brilliant tactical maneuvers on a small tendril, even, as wrong as it sounds, to save a world. This is a medium-term foe we're fighting. It will be here a millennium from now, and thus it's best to use strategy, not tactics, to kill it. Chapter Master Marnus Calgar. On the rare occasion they are the attacking force, the Ultramarines generally do their best to cause as little destruction as possible except against a chaos world, where they do their best to cause maximum collateral damage. Typically, the Ultramarines leave the civilians of a rebellious world alone to the extent that is possible, and even against Xeno's infrastructure is often left in place. What is waged is a street-level campaign of extermination. This is a costly and slow way of invasion, but it results in worlds that can be immediately productive. In defense, meanwhile, the Ultramarines do their best not to let an attacker even reach a planet's surface, or at least to permit as few landings as possible. If the enemy has landed, the Ultramarines will retreat to fortresses and hives, simultaneously evacuating the populace, and wage long-term siege warfare. In the event of a victory, the Ultramarines might use their knowledge as the Imperium's foremost authority on fighting demonic taint. Home world. The Ultramarines' home planet is Macrage. A mountainous world on the galaxy's eastern fringe, Macrage was home to a civilization emerging from feudalism when Robert Guilliman arrived. 2 consuls governed an empire that spanned most of the planet. The Primarch's arrival upset Macrage's delicate balance of power, and then an Eldar attack blew it to bits, along with much of the world's human population. Robert Guilliman reunited the planet, but during the Great Betrayal, the new system, an economic powerhouse, was once again destroyed, this time by the Word-bearers. Nevertheless, Macrage was not destroyed, and after conducting a long operation to wipe out the Word-bearers' chaos taint, Guilliman rebuilt his homeworld's infrastructure once again, bringing in new immigrants and rebuilding ruined cities. Macrage today is far more militarized than in either of its prior incarnations, its industry and economy largely focused on the eternal war the Imperium is in and on defending the planet. Nevertheless, it remains a standard-bearer for the Imperium's eastern regions in culture and technology. Large swaths of Macrage are, in fact, a recreated wilderness, in which animals long extinct in the rest of the Imperium frolic. Macrage retains its spectacular natural beauty, though below the surface are the scars of the lost past. Beliefs. The Ultramarines believe wholeheartedly in the imperial truth. They have always stood in opposition to superstition and irrationality, and indeed seem to hate chaos for its unreasonableness as much as for its evil. At the same time, some irrational psychoses do exist in the Legion. Most prominently, Guilliman blames himself, and collectively, the Ultramarines blame themselves, for the two devastations of Macrage and the death of Fulgrim. Yet it would be a grave error to assume the 13th Legion is defined by its regrets. Above all, the Ultramarines believe the Imperium, having lasted for 10 millennia, should and probably will last 100 more. They stare into the face of deep time, planning for it, beginning projects that will take eternity to complete, protecting the most incremental advantage, never wavering in the face of eons, knowing no fear, just as they always have and always will. Gene Seed. The Ultramarines' gene seed is the purest among even the loyalist legions, in large part due to Guilliman remaining among them. There are no known deviations. Battle Cry. The Ultramarines quote lines from poetry to march under in any particular campaign, the most common being, courage and honor / until the end and past it. 999.M41. The damage from Hanso's assault had been healed. Guilliman still did not know why the Iron Warriors had attacked as they had. It did not fit Hanso's profile to do something like this without reason. But as of late, Robert Guilliman was finding it difficult to focus on chaos. He had always thought the greatest risk to the future came from enemy plots. There were, after all, countless foes in the galaxy. The Eldar had burnt Macrage the first time, and Chaos the second. The Orcs were also an ever-present plague, and far smarter than most gave them credit for. But after the battle with the Swarm Lord, Guilliman was convinced that all of those were but distractions. There were threats to the Tyranids in the Milky Way, he knew, perhaps even more than there had been threats in the hundreds, thousands, of galaxies previously eaten by the Swarm. But that brief moment of knowledge shared with the Swarm Lord he had crushed to a pulp. Robert Guilliman, as he stood in his sanctum and stared at the orrery, knew that the Tyranids stood, at this rate, a real chance of winning the final galactic conflict. And if they did, if they mastered the warp and therefore travel through it at long last, then all life in the universe would end within centuries. Deep time would be gone, not only for humanity but for everyone. But it had not yet. And with a heavy breath, Robert Guilliman unclasped the lesser warhammer from his back and opened a vault that had remained untouched for 10 millennia. Forge-a-breaker's handle fit perfectly into his gauntlets, and as he made a couple of careful movements with it, he wondered how he had ever fought with any other weapon. It seemed to weigh twice as much as it had during the Crusade, made heavy by memories and regrets. A coating of dust, which even the best seals could not entirely keep out, covered its once gleaming surface. But it had not rusted, nor had its mechanisms broken under the pressures of time, no more than Guilliman himself had. And like Forge-breaker, he would need to rediscover within himself the resolve of the Great Crusade, here at Edge of Dusk. One final time. And after, there would be other heroes. Check the description for the links to the author.